Hello, and thank you for inviting me to SIF 2021. Your agenda has never been more important than it is today. Our labor markets are changing fundamentally, and it's driven by the capabilities, the skills of people. Those who have the right digital and green skills never had the life chances they have today. But those who struggle entering the knowledge economy face increasing difficulties, greater risks of social and economic exclusion. We have new forms of work organizing, companies, restructuring themselves, digital platforms driving the reorganization of not just firms but entire economies. You no longer know, what is a small and a big company. A few employees can change the world these days. You no longer know who's the business and who is, the consumer. Both can play both roles, depending on their human talent. And even governments are starting to work with digital platforms. And what is also very clear is that the drivers behind risks of automation are often related to the skills of people. People with a strong skill base and economies with a strong skill base face a much lower risk of automation. You can see that here on the vertical axis. You can see a measure of the skills of adults. On the horizontal axis, you can see the risk of automation, and the two are related not just for individuals, but for entire economies, for entire countries. But that's not always translating into the mindset of young people. If you look at 15-year-olds who we surveyed in our last PISA assessment, you can see, 30, 40, sometimes more than 50% of young people, don't see that new world. They aspire to jobs that may no longer exist when they graduate. Our education systems are often good at keeping learners inside and the rest of the world outside. But we need to better integrate them to make sure that, young people can see what they want to be. And the, drivers behind this are not difficult to discern. The kind of things that are easy to teach and test have also become easy to digitize and automate. We're seeing a decline in routine cognitive and routine manual tasks. Technology-intensive tasks are on the rise, and you put the two things together, and that is the future of work. But I also want to look at the positive side of it. We often associate technology with, taking jobs away, robots, taking over whole factories. But actually what our data show is that technology is just a great amplifier of skills. Technology-intensive jobs are much better at extracting value from the skills of people. And that's not just digital skills here on the left side, but in virtually every skill category that we have measured. Technology-intensive workplaces convert skills into better jobs and better lives. And even more than that, we see that digitally intensive workplaces make you more to learn with your co-workers. People become more collaborative, more interactive, learn together with each other. You learn more by doing, and you're much more likely to keep up to date. The future, workplace is always a place of learning. So how well are we prepared for this? Well, we tested the digital skills of adults a while ago, and you can see when you look at older adults, 55 to 65-year-olds, you have a few countries, like New Zealand or the United States, where you have, 1 in 4 older workers being ready for the digital world of today. And in most countries, it's a lot less than this, maybe, 1 in 5. You can say, well, that's all about older people not keeping up to date with technological developments. But even when you look at this among younger adults, 25 to 34-year-olds, you can see here, people are better skilled, more ready for the digital world. But even here, it's typically only, 50% of younger people being ready for the world in which they live today, not tomorrow. But it's also interesting how the pace of change has varied across countries. United States being one of the front runners, today it's just, in the middle of the pack. Not because things got worse, but because things got faster, better in so many other countries. Now look at, Singapore, one of the laggards in the older generation because their country was poor and had very little human capital. But they've massively invested in their skill base. And now they're at the frontier, just following Finland and Sweden. Singapore was also one of the first countries to think about skills future that has, integrated academic and vocational learning, giving people more ownership over what they learn, how they learn, when they learn, where they learn. Breaking the monopolies of these very lumpy academic qualification structures through the emergence of micro-credentials and new forms of recognizing the skills of people. And some people call all of this a race between technology and education. Before the first industrial revolution, neither technology nor education made a big difference for most people. But when the first industrial revolution hit, moving technology ahead of people, it caused a huge amount of social pain because people were just not ready for it. But then, we invented public schooling, making people compatible with the ways of working and the norms of the industrial age, and that created generations of prosperity. But we've sort of become complacent since then, and we haven't really noticed the digital revolution early enough, moving technology once again ahead of the skills of people and causing, new forms of social pain. Young people graduating from universities having difficulties finding a good job, while employers tell you they cannot find people with the skills they need. The challenge is to move people once again ahead of the technologies of our times, to open up new forms of prosperity, to educate people for their future, rather than for our past. And I show you one of the most powerful predictors of learning outcomes in schools. On the vertical axis, you see the quality of learning outcomes of our school systems at the age of 15. On the horizontal axis, you see a measure of a student growth mindset. You can see a country like Estonia that is doing really well academically. It's also the country where most young people have that confidence and belief that, just the sky is the limit. They can always grow beyond their limitations. You contrast that with Indonesia, where many students, struggle academically and often believe, success is about the intelligence I was born with. And if you have that belief, why would you study hard? Why would you invest in your education? You can see, the mindsets of people and the talent are actually quite closely related. And it's not just about academic outcomes. You can see students with a growth mindset were more likely to be motivated to master difficult tasks. They had a greater sense of self-efficacy. They were less afraid of failure. And if you want people, to be imaginative, to creative, you have to give them room to experiment. If they experiment, they take risks. If they take risks, they make mistakes. If our education systems do not help students to learn from and with mistakes, maybe they're not going to be so creative. Mindset, very important driver of skills. But the most important challenge ahead of us is that, we used to learn to do the work, and suddenly we find ourselves in a world where learning is the work. In the past, you'd get to school, to university, you do your job, and then you retire. Today, early childhood education is becoming so much more important because many of the social and emotional skills that are so central for success at the workplace are learned not later in life, but at the very earliest life. Curiosity, empathy, leadership, courage. And then tertiary education, much greater focus on transversal skills. And then, working and learning become one of the same. And that's where micro-credentials are becoming so central. Tools that are much more granular to recognize what people have learned, irrespective of where they actually acquired those skills. Companies are becoming so important learning environments. But then, we need to ask ourselves, who should pay for what, when, and how? How do we share the costs and benefits between the individuals, the companies, and our societies, the taxpayers? What are the incentives to encourage continuous learning, to encourage companies to educate people not just to do their current job better, but to educate them to be ready for the next industry, the next job? Who sets the standards of this? How do we recognize those skills? And then comes this whole business of certifying skills in a digital world. We are beyond the times where we could live with a kind of lumpy degrees and qualifications that recognize you once for all for what you've learned up front in your life. I'm a good example. I'm a graduate of physics. I did very well when I had studied. If you put me in a laboratory today, I'm going to do a dismal job because, the world of science has advanced so much beyond what I studied. And at the same time, I've learned new things in the field I'm working now in education that, is not recognized in my degree. Our skilled systems have become need to become so much more relevant and granular. And that's where micro-credentials need to become that new currency. Of course, we need to make them compatible. We need to make them interoperable. That's the big challenge ahead. So this is not the Wild West, but that we actually can organize the learning of people across meaningful metrics. One of the big challenges for the future. We need to think harder of what we do with people outside companies. For the unemployed, you can say, well, that's the task of governments to pick up those costs, ensure that, those people get adequate training. But what about people who are just, at risk of losing their job? Are firms, governments responsible for that? What about people who want to just change their job, grow into a new job? Who identifies their needs and supports their learning? What about the gig economy? Who are those people? How can we better support them? And then, we need to answer some really important governance challenge. New forms of work, the gig economy often makes it harder to tax people. How do we tax people? How do we support, their social environment, their health insurance? The change in demographics in many of our countries means that there's a shift, from investing in the future to, back investing in our past. So that's the biggest risk that, that investment in talent becomes neglected. The decentralized information of our new skill systems often means there's less control. The formal educational institutions are losing power and relevance. We are seeing that kind of unbundling of content, delivery, and accreditation that created very powerful monopolies in education. Those universities, they can charge you exorbitant tuition by bundling educational content, delivery, and accreditation. But today, content is ubiquitous. Delivery, you find lots of really interesting ways of learning. And accreditation, well, micro-credentials are becoming a new currency here. We also see that the link between formal education and the job market is weakening. Digital industries now hiring in new ways. Those are the challenges that we are facing today. But, skills have become the currency of 21st century economies. And I know that's what you're addressing at the SIF 21 today. Thank you very much.